Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
Always glad to have with us Alfred University history professor, Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, first up, and it's on everybody's mind this morning, the Supreme Court choice of President Donald Trump, Judge Brett Cavanaugh. What do we know about him, Dr. Ostrower?
Brian, if I can just divert for a moment, I want to make a comment kind of echoing something that Mayor Hogan said on the show yesterday, namely to simply, convey my own sympathies, my condolences to the family of Nick Clark. Nick was a student, of course, at Alfred University. He was a very, very good student of an environmental studies major. He was also an outstanding athlete. I think that probably most people listening to the program know something about his biography by this time. It was a tragic moment and a very dignified funeral that we had here in Alfred on Sunday. And I just don't want to let that go unremarked on. So far as Cavanaugh is concerned, look, I think that, a lot of us are going to learn something about a judge of whom we knew relatively little. He was on the the Washington, D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the second highest court in the country, right below the Supreme Court, and quite a respected member of that court. He has a lot of the more or less traditional virtues of Supreme Court nominees. He was a Yale undergraduate. He went to Yale Law School. I mean, he really comes out of that, Eastern establishment kind of background, at least educationally. He was a very, very good student. He wound up eventually clerking for Justice Kennedy, who just retired. As a matter of fact, it's possible, and we really don't know this for sure, that part of what convinced part of the way in which President Trump persuaded Justice Kennedy to retire was by indicating that he might nominate Cavanaugh to the Supreme Court in his place. In any case, he is now the nominee, and there's going to be a fight, and the Democrats are going to line up on one side, the Republicans obviously on the other. There's going to be a lot of exaggeration. Congressman Reed said this morning that Cavanaugh is a spectacular choice. I certainly wouldn't use that word any more than I would have said, as President Bush said, first President Bush, a number of years ago, that Justice Clarence Thomas, was the, quote, most qualified man in the United States to sit on the Supreme Court. There's a lot of exaggeration. On the other hand, Cavanaugh does have a fairly distinguished record. He's going to have some support from liberals, not a lot. There's an article, a column in today's New York Times by a liberal constitutional law professor from Yale, who was one of Cavanaugh's teachers, really very, very supportive of Cavanaugh. So, I think that we're going to find that not everything is going to be worked out here according to formula, but I do want to mention at least this, that he is a very, very strong supporter of expansive executive power. He's going to argue almost certainly that the president should not be indicted under any circumstances.
Yes, he did that. What was that, in 2009? He said that Congress should think of passing a law exempting a president while in office from criminal prosecution and investigation. That's correct.
And what he argues is that a president cannot function. He cannot do his normal work if he is under such a cloud. But the danger there is that it places a president above the law. A president can violate the law willfully, and then, of course, not have to worry about prosecution. By the same token, he tends to be an originalist, along the lines of Justice Scalia. That is to say, someone who argues that we should interpret the Constitution along the lines of what the Founding Fathers originally intended. The problem here, again, is that we don't always know what words mean. For instance, the Founding Fathers talked about regulating commerce. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean regulating merely trade, the movement of goods from one point to another? Or does it mean, does it include the actual manufacture of goods? And lawyers have argued over this kind of thing from 1789, or at least 1791, right until the present time.
Talking to Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. I guess NBC, from looking online, scouring the internet, looking online, NBC is just reporting that they've heard that Justice Kennedy had been in negotiations with the Trump team for months over Kennedy's replacement, and that Kennedy only stepped down when he felt comfortable with the replacement. What do you make of that? Do you put any stock in that, Gary?
I certainly do. I think it's consistent with what I said a few minutes ago. And I did not know about this report until you just mentioned it.
Yeah, this is just breaking.
But, I think that Justice Kennedy knows Brett Kavanaugh very, very well, has a lot of respect for him, as I mentioned a moment ago. Brett Kavanaugh was a clerk for Justice Kennedy, and I would be surprised if there had not been some kind of negotiations. I mean, Kennedy did not have to retire. That he did at this particular time, I think, took quite a number of people, including myself, by surprise. And my hunch is that, and I have no way to prove this, I have absolutely no hard evidence, nor I suspect do the authors of the report that you just heard, but in all likelihood, he would not have retired unless he was reasonably assured that someone would be appointed of whom he approved. And I don't think there's anyone who he would more approve than Brett Kavanaugh. We're
talking with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. Brexit over in England, the exit from the European Union. How's that coming along, Dr. Ostrower? What do we know about the progress with that?
Very, very slowly. The vote for Brexit, and remember, Brexit means England's exit from the European Union. That vote occurred 2 full years ago. Many people had expected that the break would be almost immediate. Well, it was not. Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, a conservative Prime Minister, was supportive of Brexit, of the exit, and yet she has, I don't want to say dragged her feet, but she's gone relatively slowly in respect to the exit. Well, why is that? And the answer is because it's very, very complex. There are many, many kinds of regulations that the European Union has established. There are many wrinkles having to do with free trade, having to do with immigration and so forth within the European context, all of which cannot be sorted out so very, very quickly. There are people in England, including the foreign minister, whose name was Boris Johnson. I say was because he resigned just 2 days ago. The Brexit secretary, the man specifically in charge of dealing with the Brexit exit, was a fellow who resigned just 3 days ago. So there's really a good deal of turmoil within Theresa May's cabinet, within the Conservative Party. People like Johnson wanted an immediate exit. They really did want a very, very sharp exit.
Yes, and as you bring this up, I'm on the UK Daily Mail website, Gary, and it says Boris Johnson accused Theresa May of suffocating Brexit as he sensationally resigned as foreign secretary.
That's correct, and he, but what May is arguing is that there will be chaos if there's an immediate exit. Companies, and I'm talking about large companies like Land Rover, Jaguar, has said that they will move some of their operations out of England in the event that Brexit occurs, that they will close plants in England. They're talking about a $100 billion cost to this exit. There are other companies, including Airbus, that have argued that, much the same. They said that BMW has plants in Great Britain. BMW has said that they will move their plants out of Great Britain. So there could be a lot of, there's certainly a threat to British employment, and there's a threat to British prosperity if there is a very, very quick exit. So Theresa May is trying to finesse this. She's trying, in other words, to work at a situation where there will be some economic connection to the European Union, even though there will be no formal membership in the European Union for England. And I don't know when all of this is going to settle out. It's possible that it's going to cost Theresa May her prime ministership, because there may be a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons in respect to this whole issue.
On that issue that you just brought up about how the in the political system in England makes it so the prime minister has to step down if they're unpopular. Any thoughts on why that was never instituted in America by the Founding Fathers?
I think that because the Founding Fathers wanted a greater sense of separation between the President on one hand and Congress on the other hand. The British Prime Minister is a member of the House of the House of Commons. And if the House of Commons is supportive, in this case, she remains Prime Minister. If the House of Commons is not supportive, and when I say not supportive, it means that not only might she face the opposition of the opposing party, but also loses a certain amount of support within her own party, then she has no choice but to resign, and she might also call for new elections. And in this rather unstable situation where Great Britain finds itself, that presents a lot of uncertainty. The Founding Fathers in the United States wanted to separate, as I say, the President from the Congress. Initially, I might add, we didn't even want a president. When the American Revolution occurred, within a couple of years, Congress had written what we call the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation did not call for an executive. There was a kind of a figurehead executive, but not a real independent executive. And then that didn't work out very well. Within a period of approximately 10 years, the Constitution was then written, our Constitution as we know it today, and we created, as I say, that a fully independent executive, so that, Congress has a role in the passage of laws, obviously, but then those laws must be signed by the President. And if the President refuses to sign, if he vetoes a law, Congress can, under certain conditions, override that veto. But it's fairly unusual. That doesn't happen very often. So it was really a matter of creating, on this side of the Atlantic, a stronger executive, independent of the Congress, in contrast to what you had in Great Britain.
Would it, and not to get too far off onto U.S. and British history, but would it be accurate to say that the American founders, on the one hand, and we talked about this last time you were on, the Declaration of Independence was very anti-King George. On the other hand, it seemed like they had mixed feelings about England in that they were somewhat influenced by the British system of government. What are your thoughts there?
Well, they were very influenced by the British system, and they were influenced by the British system in part because they were themselves British for so many years. They didn't copy exactly the British system. But, in Great Britain, you had something of a separation of powers. It was not as distinct. It was not as clear-cut as it would be under the American Constitution. But, you had a king, you had a parliament, and, of course, you had a judiciary. But, as I say, the politics came right out of the House of Commons. And that would, in fact, further develop along those very, very same lines over the next 200 years or so, as it is today in Great Britain. Whereas in the United States, while we adopted many, many elements of the British system, not the least of which was going to be the British system of common law, we nevertheless established a fully independent judiciary and, of course, a full separation between the President on one hand, the executive on one hand, and Congress on the other. So, I would argue that, the American system was 80% British, but it was not 100% British, and that remains the fact to this very, very day. Would it be better to have a president who is subject to votes of no confidence? I think historically we in America would say no. I think that having that independent president versus Congress, does allow for at least a degree of negotiation, but by the same token, there have been moments when presidents have acted in a very independent fashion. The best example of that, for those of you who might remember your American history from high school, was when Andrew Jackson, way back in 1832, vetoed a measure creating a national bank in this country. And an entire election, the election of 1832, was based on that very veto. Eventually, Jackson was reelected. His veto was sustained, but it further reinforced the idea that the American executive remains independent of Congress.
This is such a great conversation we're having this morning with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower that I'm late in getting to the break. Let's take it now. We'll be back in about 90 seconds. Stay with us.
You take flooring for granted, don't you? I mean, if you think about how much wear and tear you put that floor through, why would you even think about buying a cheap floor when you need one? Buy quality flooring from Mullen Factory Direct Floor Covering in Almond. Mullins buys in bulk, and that means you save money on quality flooring. They even offer 0% interest for qualified buyers. Shop over 400,000 square feet of major name brand in-stock flooring. And get it installed now. And no box store wait. Mullen Factory Direct Floor Covering in Almond. Let them floor you.
Now checking in with meteorologist Rob Carolyn.
Got a little bit of rain this morning, Brian, out over Lake Ontario. It's associated with some cooler air that's going to be sinking southward today. And eventually some of these showers that I can see stretched out ahead of the front will drop into the southern tier. That's later today. We'll see some sunshine along with some passing clouds. May pick up a shower or thunderstorm later today, 80 to 85. Sun was up this morning at 5:44. It will set tonight at 8:48. Tonight we turn clear behind the front, cooler, drier, 55 overnight. Gorgeous day tomorrow. Abundant sunshine, deep blue skies. We've had a couple of these so far this summer. Air out of Canada, so we're 75 to 80 tomorrow afternoon. Clear skies tomorrow night. Lows will be 50 to 55. And the outlook for Thursday, abundant sunshine. Temperatures 80 to 85 degrees.
And we're back with Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. The talks between the U.S. and North Korea have gone south, so to speak. The North Koreans put out a statement saying that the U.S. Is making unilateral and gangster-like demands for denuclearization. Dr. Ostrower, your thoughts?
Well, the North Koreans are saying that the talks had a gangster-like character. President Trump is saying that the talks went exceedingly well, and he has great respect for the North Korean dictator. You can choose who you want to believe. My best guess, and this is really in some ways consistent with things I've said on this show before, is that the North Koreans have absolutely no intention, and I mean no as in N-O, they have no intention of denuclearizing. They may eliminate they may suspend some of their testing and so forth, but those nuclear weapons provide for the North Koreans a sense of entry into the international community in a way that they're not going to have without such weapons. The North Koreans know exactly what happened to Omar Gaddafi in Libya after he denuclearized. Namely, he was subject to attack and, of course, killed within a period of 7 years. The North Korean dictator Kim has no intention of allowing that happen to himself. Now, I may be wrong. Maybe all of this is, kind of a charade, and maybe they will denuclearize. But I don't think that very many experts in diplomatic history, very many experts in international relations believe that this is ever going to happen.
Question for you on that. If North Korea, Kim Jong-un, does not want to dismantle the nuclear program over there, why did he go to Singapore, he being Kim Jong-un?
Because he had a lot to gain by showing up in the first place. Until this year, until 2018, Kim was in large measure an outcast. North Korea was kind of a hermit kingdom. North Korea probably had less international respect than any other country on earth. And yet he winds up meeting individually with the President of the United States. It places him on a level of kind of international respect. People are going to have to take him seriously, as the United States has indeed taken him seriously. I think it is a terrific kind of reputational win for the North Koreans. We are not going back to where we were before. From this point on, I think the North Koreans become part of these conversations. But I also want to remind you and remind our listeners that in the final analysis, what the North Koreans are going to do will have to be consistent with what the Chinese are willing to allow them to do. And that is to say, the Chinese control about 90% of the North Korean economy. And if the North Koreans are going to buck the Chinese, they're going to pay a very, very heavy price. And the Americans have very little leverage. We have very, very little leverage over the Chinese at this point. We might want to get the Chinese on our side in respect to North Korean denuclearization. But so long as President Trump is kicking up, so long as he is creating a trade war with China, the Chinese have zero willingness. They have zero incentive to cooperate with us. So we're not going to have their support in respect to North Korea, and the North Koreans are going to go their own separate ways, and we see that happening already with this gangster comment.
Down to 60 seconds, Dr. Ostrower. President Trump posted on Twitter last night he has confidence Kim Jong-un will honor the contract we signed, and more importantly, our handshake we agreed to denuclearize North Korea. China, on the other hand, may be exerting negative pressure on the deal because of our posture on Chinese trade. I hope not, though, Trump says. Down to the last 60 seconds, your thoughts, Dr. Ostrower.
Well, I think that Trump is living in a fantasy land. He knows relatively little about international politics. He assumes that, some people believe, mean what they say, as in the case of Putin or as in the case of Kim in North Korea. That's not the way international politics has worked. Countries are going to protect their own national interests, the way in which they define their national interests, not in the way in which President Trump defines their national interests.
Dr. Ostrower, we're out of time. Thank you so much. Please stay on the line.
I'll see you guys next week.
AM 1480 WLEA Hornell.